Hello everyone and welcome once again to Python with Obinkweju. Today we are looking at an interesting topic called the list comprehension. So list comprehensions are actually a concise way in which we can create lists in Python. In a very normal circumstance, when we want to create some list, we would normally implement what we call the for loop and then create some kind of an empty list somewhere. Then we would append, based on our for loop, we then append the characters or the whatever result into our list and then form a list. And that is a bit complex. So list comprehension, I would say, is just a shorthand of creating lists employing for loops. Let's jump into our Jupyter notebook to understand this concept. All right, so I'm just going to create an empty list. I'll call this my list. And I'll first of all use a for loop to create a list. So I have an empty list that is a placeholder that I'll be using to collect the list of items that I want. So I'll just say for letter in, let's say Python, I would want you to go ahead and say my list dot append. What are we appending to it? We are appending that letter. If I run this and I check my list now, that is the empty list, we end up getting this. So we created an empty list here, and then we decided to use for loop to iterate over a string Python. So we say for every letter, so for P in this word Python, go ahead and pick that P and then append. We know the append method, it adds an item to the tail end of a list. So we pick P, and then because this list is empty, it will be the first to be appended. Then we come and pick the next one for letter. So for Y in Python, pick that letter and append it to this list. So we end up getting that. We keep doing that till we get to the end. Now let us look at how we can use list comprehension to achieve the same results. To use list comprehension to create a list, you must declare a variable that will hold that list. So I'll call this my list2. Then you bring your assignment operator, then square, just like we create a list. So it's like we are creating a list here. However, when we get to this stage, we are now going to give the loop condition. So here I would say we are just making reference to this. So I'll go ahead and I'll say for letter. So for every letter in the word Python, what do I want to do? So for every letter in this word Python, I would want to pick that letter and then place it in this list. So it's more readable when we do it this way. So you say for every letter in this word Python, pick. So for P, pick that P, place it in this list. For Y, pick that letter and place it in this list. So we are creating a list, and we all know how lists look like. If I go ahead and I check my list now, my list2, we end up getting the same thing. So that is how we can easily use list comprehensions to adopt the same process to end up getting a list. And it's obvious that this is very concise as compared to that. Now let us try something more complex to really know how efficient the list comprehension is. I'm going to just create another empty list, and I will say squares. I'll call it squares, and I am going to use a for loop to iterate over. So I'll say for number in range. We've already seen this before. We've seen this before. I'll say for number in range 10, and what this means is that this range function would generate a range of sequential numbers for us, and when we specify range 10, it's going to say from 0 to 10 but excluding 10. So we're going to get 10 numbers, 10 range of numbers from 0 to 9. So from 0 to 9, I would want to pick each number, and what I want to, so I'll pick each number, and after picking each number, I would want to square that number, so multiply that number by itself. After doing that, I would want to append that number. So I pick the number, I multiply it by itself. Then I go ahead and then append that number. Where am I append it into this empty list that I created. So I'll see dot append. So it's the same, picking this empty list, and then I append the number from the range and multiply it by itself. Now let us run this. Let me go ahead then. Let's print it to see what is actually going on. So I'll print that. Now we started with an empty list, and then we created a range of numbers from 0 to 9. So we picked the first number, then we multiply it by itself. So 0 times 0 is 0. Then we append it to this empty list. We pick the next number in the range, that is 1 multiplied by itself, append it. We pick the next number 2. 2 times 2 is 4. We append it to this list, empty list. We pick the next number 3. 3 times 3 is 9, and we append it. So that is what we are doing here. Now let us go ahead and use list comprehension to achieve the same result. So I'm just going to say square. As I said earlier, you must have a variable to hold it. So I'll say squares. I'll call this squares 2. And then you open your square brackets. And we go ahead with the same thing. So I'll say for number in range 10. So for every number in this range from 0 to 9, you pick that number, and then we multiply it by itself. So number multiplied by number. So pick 0 for number. So for 0 in range 10, pick number and multiply it by itself and place it in this list. If we go ahead and then we check our square 2, we end up getting the same results. Obviously, we could realize that this is very concise and short and very readable as compared to going through this whole lot of processes. And now let's look at a use case for list comprehension. So let's say we have a list of distance in miles. So let me see distances in miles. And let's just place in some random numbers. Okay, so these are, sorry, we forgot to bring our assignment operator. So, these are some distances that are stored in miles. We would want to convert these distances from miles to kilometers. Conversion rate, one mile is actually equal to, so let me just call this conversion. 1 mile is actually equal to 1.60934 kilometers. So we'll be using this conversion rate to convert our miles to kilometers. I'm just going to create a variable to hold the converted miles in. So I'll just call this, let me just call it distances in kilometers. So we know that we've already seen the conversion. Then I'll go ahead and I open my square bracket. So what do? I'll just say for, let's say, every distance. This can be anything. I'm just making, so for every distance, but we can say for every value in this distances. So for every value in this list, we just want to pick that distance. So this distance, we want to pick it and then multiply it. That is how to get that. We multiply it by the conversion rate here. So we multiply it by the conversion rate. And we go ahead, if we go ahead and then after doing this, if we go ahead and say print distance in kilometers, if I run this, I end up getting a list that contains these distances in miles that have been converted into kilometers. Now, note that we could have just ignored this whole section, this conversion rate. We could have just ignored that and then just go ahead and say, okay, for every distance in this list, go ahead and pick that distance and multiply it by the conversion rate, which is 1.60934. And when we run that, we end up getting the same result. Okay, so let us look at the very last scenario here. Let's say we want to, how to use if for loop with ifs in it to generate a list using a list comprehension. In this example, we are going to pick some range of numbers, and out of this range of numbers, we are going to just select only the even numbers. After selecting the even numbers, we would find the squares of those even numbers. So let's go ahead and demonstrate that. I'll just call this even squares. Even squares. And then I'll open that. So I'll say for number in the range, let me say range 15. So from 15, range 15 is 0, numbers from 0 to 14. So if I pick each of those numbers, I would want to check a condition after picking a number from the range. So if I pick 0 from that range of 0 to 14, I would want to check if that number that I picked, if that number modulo 2, we've already seen this concept, is equal to 0. What this means is that we are checking if that number, when we divide it by 2, is the remainder the same as 0. If it is so, then we need that number. So I'll pick that number. So if this condition is met, I will then pick the number. So I come back to the beginning again. I'll pick the number, and what do I do with the number? I would want to just find the square of it. So I multiply the number by itself. If I go ahead and I run this, and now if I print our even squares, we end up getting. So look at the range. We started from 0 to 14. The first number was 0. And if we pick that number 0, we divide by 2, we are going to get this. So let's just jump to the second one. We picked the next number in the range was 1. But because 1, when we divide by 2, it's not 0, we skip that and we jump to the next number, 2. 2 divided by 2 would be 1 remainder 0. So it meets this condition. So we pick 2 and multiply it by itself, getting 4. So we keep on skipping. We get to the next number, 4. We pick 4 because it meets this if condition. We multiply it. We can actually even go ahead and say that number multiplied by itself plus 10. And we run that and it works perfectly. So you pick the first number 0, multiply by itself 0, then add 10. We end up getting 10. Pick the next even number in this range. That is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 10 is 14. So these are basic examples of how we can use list comprehension. This brings us to the end of this session. Thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We will meet in our next lesson. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.